Okay, we're going to have a look at unbalanced diets, and in particular we're going to have a look at what happens when you have an excess of either too much food or a particular food group. In particular, we're going to have a look at obesity. So to identify if someone is suffering from obesity, we can measure their body mass index. It's a very simple calculation. Sometimes it's called your BMI, and it gives you a rough estimate about the amount of mass someone is carrying relative to their height. If the number is greater than 30, and that's kilograms per meter squared, then they could be considered as being obese. So how do you calculate it? You need to take two measurements. You need to know your mass, so you need to pop on a set of scales, measure your mass in kilograms, and then you need to measure your height, and that has to be in meters, and then we square that number. So here's an example of how it might work. Someone who was 50 kilograms and had a height of 1.5 meters, we then have to square that number. So this would look like 50 over 2.25. Once you've done the calculation, you should get a number of 22.2, and this is kilograms per meter squared. And clearly this person's BMI is under the value of 30, so you'd have to assume that they've got a pretty healthy mass compared to their height. Again, this is only an indicator. There's lots of different reasons why people might have a higher mass compared to their height. So for example, if you're pregnant, you're carrying a baby, you're at the end of your pregnancy, you're going to be much heavier for your height compared to what you were before, and that's not because of any excess body weight from overeating or anything like that. That's because you're carrying a baby. Someone who's a bodybuilder, for example, will have a high proportion of muscle in their body compared to fat, so they might have quite a low amount of body fat. So we have to use this just as an indicator, but it's a good marker. So how do people basically increase this value up to the point of 30 and above? It's pretty simple, really. If you consume, so that's if you eat, more energy from your food than you use, then your body will want to store that energy for whenever it might be needed. So it converts the type of food that you're consuming into body fat. So that's a great way of storing that energy for another time. Now it doesn't mean that you have to eat lots and lots of fatty foods. Your body's got its ability to turn things like sugar, lots of proteins, lots of different substances into body fat. It's a great storage substance to use. However, an excess of body fat can result in other diseases. So someone who suffers from obesity can then find that they've got other diseases to deal with later on in life. So it could lead to things like heart disease. There's a whole range of different types of heart diseases, but it can have an impact on the heart. It can cause things like a stroke, which is where you get a blockage in the arteries that lead up to the brain. So we get blockage of blood to the brain. It could result in things like type 2 diabetes, where you struggle to control insulin levels in your body and ultimately the glucose levels inside your blood. And then finally, it can cause various types of cancer, and not necessarily just one of these, it could be a combination of all of these. However, it's much better to go for a preventative measure rather than to treat it much later on in life. So to prevent you getting to this point, it's pretty simple, really. There's two main things that you can do to have an impact on the amount of energy that you take in compared to what you use. If you want to keep your diet the same, then if you want to use more energy up, you can simply do more exercise. And it doesn't have to be excessive. It could just be exercising regularly for 20 to 30 minutes a day and building that up. You could do this in combination though with making better choices with food. You don't always necessarily have to cut out food completely. You can still have the same number of meals that you might have per day, but you can just make much smarter choices and changing portion size and things like that. So there are some really key preventative measures that you can put in place to prevent yourself getting into this category of 30 kilograms per meter squared. So quick version then, let's go through this once more. An unbalanced diet, especially when you have an excess, is when you have too much. That could result in obesity, and we can identify if you suffer from obesity by measuring your body mass index. Obviously we have to look at you as a person, because there are lots of scenarios where you could have a high BMI but you might not necessarily carry a lot of extra body fat. The reason you would carry extra body fat is because you are basically eating more energy than you are using per day, and eventually over time your body converts whatever that food source is, whether it's lots of sugar or protein or fat, into body fat, and that can result in things like heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, cancer, and there's lots and lots of other related diseases to obesity too. And then easy way to combat this, although it's a long drawn out process, we can start to make better food choices. We can change our portion sizes, how frequently we eat, and also what we put on our plate as well. And we can do more exercise as well, and over a longer period of time, and it'd be much more sustainable, we could see this number decrease.